Is anyone excited? Because I'm really excited.
You won't be if it's a bomb.
Don't kill the vibe, Graham.
Can we open it?
It's the right question.
Pull to open.
Pull to open!
Yes, and what do you do? What do we actually know?
This setting dials the temporal destination. Pretty simple, pretty deadly. Now, can we concentrate?
Here come the drums!
So here it comes, the sound of drums. Here come the drums, here come the drums.
Hello and welcome to Pull to Open, an ongoing quest to watch every episode of the television series Doctor Who in random order. I'm Pete Paschal.
And I'm Chris Taylor, and we are a couple of guys, a couple of journalists, a couple of Doctor Who fans who've been watching the show most of our life at this stage and are loving seeing it again, or sometimes the first time, in random order. And we're finally back in New Who. It's a good
I like
feeling.
again for the first time.
Again,
I like all
for
that.
the first time.
I always like that expression. I don't know why. But yes, we are back in New Who, guys. We've been doing a lot of classic Who. So for those who need a little update, previously on Pull to Open, 3 episodes ago or so, we were in the 7th Doctor, our first McCoy episode. It was Battlefield, and the last appearance of the Brigadier in the television series, if you don't count his cyberized form.
And the first mention of King Charles III.
That's
Sort
true.
of.
Yeah, sort of, obliquely. Then we were rocketed a little bit backward in time to a Colin Baker special episode called The Two Doctors. Special, of course, because it also starred Patrick Troughton.
Indeed.
Had a bit of a message to it about vegetarianism, which was kind of interesting.
And was supposed to be the first Doctor Who set in the United States, which may be relevant to our interests.
Yeah, which didn't actually happen. It was set in Spain, but it was originally supposed to be New Orleans. Interesting. I think you can see where we're going on our randomizer predictions here. So, but then we leapt back again to a Tom Baker episode, his first season, Revenge of the Cybermen. That was the last episode we looked at. We looked at it then. I think once was enough. And even though we have been going in old Who, honestly, I could go back even further and previously. We have not. We've done Claws of Axis. We've done a bunch of other episodes in Classic Who. We did Spearhead from Space. We have not been in New Who since the spring when we did the Eaters of Light, a Capaldi episode.
10 million Pull to Opens ago.
Today, we have finally come back, and we are at Series 11, Episode 3, the episode titled Rosa.
And what an episode it is. And what a return to New Who. I mean, it's...
Yeah.
It has been so long. I feel like that Titanic gif. You know, it's been 84 years.
It's almost a reboot in a sense, because it's funny that we've never been to a Jodie Whittaker episode in the random era of Pull to Open. Now, when we started the podcast many, many, many years ago, we weren't random, and we were commenting on the more recent season, and that was actually season 12. Series 12, excuse me. Series 12. And so we did a bunch of Whittaker stuff then, but we haven't returned since. And this is the first one back from her first season, and early in her first season. This is the third, only the third story.
Yeah, it's interesting for a number of reasons. It's interesting to dive straight back into New Who and sort of, you know, all of the snappy dialogue and the quippery that we associate with New Who that you don't get so much in the classic series unless it's like Bob Holmes at his sparkliest. It's nice to be dropped back into that and to be dropped into this one specifically. We'll get into it, but it's intense, man. First time I'd seen it since 2018, and a lot has gone down. Since 2018, you know,
in several different ways. Yeah, we'll get into it.
Yeah.
So, but before that, I think it's time we should probably enter the Pull to Open feedback loop, where we talk about everything going on with the podcast in the real world, and on the real world used a little liberally here because we're mostly talking about social networks. But one of the big things it's real. It's real enough. It's real in our world.
Yeah.
And
you're real to us, listeners. You're real to us.
Listeners, commenters, reviewers, and we have more reviewers. We like to talk about our reviews, of course, because reviews are Well, they're kind of the currency of podcasts. Also, we just love hearing from fans, obviously, but also if you leave reviews, in particular the Apple Podcast Store, they really help the show out because they make it more visible to people searching the podcast app. So if you have some time and you haven't done it already, please go ahead and leave a review there. Even if you don't use the Apple Podcast app, download it just this one time.
Even if you only use it as frequently as we go to the new show, then please just load it up and just a single emoji review, which is, I believe, we've got a review that we're highlighting with is that a single emoji as the review?
It's the title of the review, which I think is extremely clever. So the title of this review is just a blue box.
Hey, I get that reference.
It's pretty genius, I got to say. So the title's a blue box, and it's from someone I can't even pronounce. I don't think it's pronounceable. Dajo Zenon.
Zen 1. Yeah.
Zen 1. Let's try Zen 1. I'm just calling it Zen 1.
Yeah.
But it's 5-star review. Thank you. And it reads, "This may be my new favorite podcasts."
Maybe.
Maybe. There's a chance. We're looking into it still.
Okay.
No, but been slowly listening through the backlog of this show during my commutes, exposing me to a lot of classic Who I hadn't ever watched and giving some insightful, fun reviews of that and the new series, which I've been rewatching myself as well. I love this random journey. 100 emoji. Awesome.
Yep. We do like to keep it 100 here on Pull to Open.
So thank you very much, Dajo Zen 1.
Yeah, and that's sort
Really
of a reminder
appreciate
that commutes are coming back. So if you have found yourself thrust into this strange situation where you find yourself in a car first thing in the morning, barely caffeinated, and you need something to listen to, why not escape into the random history of Doctor Who via Pull to Open?
Well, car, train, subway, you can do
Yeah,
it.
yeah.
Those
Whatever
AirPods
you
work
want.
in all those places.
Exactly. Don't even bother taking the wheel. Don't stress. Use public transit, people.
Yeah, and if you're scared about the bubble, just use the transparency mode. I guess I'm speaking from my privileged Apple iPod owning position, but commutes
Indeed,
are great.
special shout out given that we're in Rosa for anyone taking the bus while listening to this.
Indeed.
And sitting wherever they want.
So next up in the feedback loop, we have been growing steadily on YouTube. Our YouTube URL, of course, is youtube.com/pull-to-open. And we keep uploading season 2. Obviously, the new episodes keep coming every Saturday, but the season 2 episodes we upload every Wednesday, and we're all the way up to School Reunion now, which was somewhere early in the sort of quote-unquote second season of Pull to Open.
Wasn't that first Tenant?
It was, it might have been. Actually, come to think of it.
Yeah.
And I remember it was interesting because we early on in our random journey, there's a couple of these epic episodes we've done. This was fairly epic because it was, Liz Sladen's return to the series.
Yeah.
And we also did like Day of the Doctor. That's actually going to come up soon, so watch for that, guys.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, School Reunion, that was a really good one to visit, and really
didn't we go out there like right after Pyramids of Mars? So it was like
it was pretty close.
Young Liz Sladen, old Liz Sladen. Kind
exactly.
of that kind of whiplash feeling. Yeah,
a little bit, but that's the beauty of the random journey. You can kind of reflect and sort of wonder what was going on in the TARDIS all those years ago. Anyway, lots of interpretation. But anyway,
what happens in the secondary control room stays in the secondary control room.
So one of the more recent episodes we've uploaded there from season 2 was actually one about the pyramid at the end of the world and the lie of the land, which of course, it's the same story, so we smushed those into one podcast. And one commenter on YouTube. Now, we often do TikTok comments of the week, but we're getting a lot of good YouTube comments, which is you might not expect given the reputation of the platform. But we have great fans on YouTube too, and I wanted to read out this comment actually from Nathan Smith because he was commenting on I think something we were talking about with regard to the reset button they hit at the end of Lie of the Land.
Right.
And his comment is, "I used to hate the everyone just kind of forgets endings that Who pulls every now and then. But then I was reminded of that year that clowns kept showing up all over the place and terrorizing folks. And we all just moved on like it never happened. Suddenly that plot point felt more relatable." And to this point, I'm kind of like, what? Why did that happen?
Which may be the
maybe
point.
I just missed it.
Hang on. Let me jump on the gaslighting here. Pete, you don't remember the clowns?
Yeah, I was glad
They were everywhere.
Totally missed it.
Yeah, they're just coming out of drains. Stephen King sued them for copyright infringement. It was a whole thing.
Well, I have to think that must have been it. There must have been, like, it came out right, I guess, around like a few years ago, and there was probably some publicity around that, and maybe there were just sort of people who imitated the publicity stunts, and so it seemed like there were a lot of clowns around. But I completely missed it, man. Like, I did not see clowns apart from some weird, creepy people on Halloween.
I don't know if he's sort of meaning clowns in like a New York kind of sense, like, yeah, you clown, get off the road, you clown. There are clowns everywhere.
No, I think he means actual, like, white makeup, red lips, red nose. I think that was. Although in New York, like, you're in the Bay Area, I'm in New York. Like, stuff kind of just bounces off us when we see it a lot of the time. I'm not going to lean into this impression of what things are like, but it is. It's like you see a lot crazy stuff going on in New York and big cities.
As a Burning Man veteran, I have to say some of my best friends are clowns.
You could not get through Times Square if you had some kind of like radar about seeing something unusual that you had to stop and look at it or do something. Like, it's just, you got naked cowboys, you got Spider-Man taking selfies. Like, it's just, okay, that's what happens.
That's what Times Square is.
There's
if
a clown.
It was full of clowns, you wouldn't even notice.
Yeah. But I do like the comment. It is true. Like, we kind of just, I think it's a little bit, putting the clowns aside for a second, a bit of a commentary on just news cycles today, and everything just seems like boom, blink and you miss it, blink and you miss it. And we do have sort of this collective amnesia as a society, like something shiny and then you just move on. And we kind of remember it, but we kind of don't. You know?
Yeah, it's funny because I think this is true of a lot of us in the in the post January 2021 world, that when we try to think about the last presidential administration, there's this sort of buzzing sound in your head and you start to feel faint.
Right.
Yeah, I can't even remember anything about those 4 years.
Might be for the best.
I may be choosing not to. There may be a neural inhibitor going on there.
Perception filter on history, perhaps. Ooh, I like that.
Ooh, very relevant when we're about to talk about structural racism.
True.
Interesting.
So, just a reminder, we are on TikTok at Pull2Open. We're also on Twitter and Instagram at Pull2Open63. So that I wanted to sort of close out the feedback loop. We're still active on the socials, and you might start even seeing some more actual photographs on Instagram, which we've got to do a little more on there. Note to self.
Stick
Okay.
on the Post-it note.
Yeah, absolutely. So not much else going on in the world of Doctor Who. As we all know, we spoke last week about the passing of the Queen, which obviously has a few consequences. One, sort of letting us play Battlefield a little better. But two, obviously, like, there's a sort of period of mourning in the UK. There's like, basically people are not announcing things at this time, So even if they had planned to announce things around the centenary special last week, I think that was probably like, let's kick it back by a week or so. I forget when the exact period of mourning ends. I think it's like 10 days. Is that right, Chris?
Something like that, yeah. I mean, we're recording this on the Sunday, the day before the Queen's funeral. She's obviously been lying in state. I've heard of quite a few people in the UK just sort of leaving the live stream on. There's like a live stream of her coffin, and people leave it on the way they would watch a Yule log.
Gotcha.
It's just sort of kind of comforting, slow TV there in the background. But yeah, I think that once that period is over, and it'll probably be some point in the next week, we can start to expect to see actual news out of the UK again.
Yeah. So one of the things they couldn't obviously stop, I think, was the printers going for Doctor Who magazine, and so. I think the one thing that we did learn in the past week was the title of the centenary episode, because that was already sort of, that news was already packaged and ready to go. So that's the one bit of news we have, and the title is
The Power
of the Doctor.
Power, unlimited power. So now we know, most importantly, the 302nd entry on the Pull to Open Codex.
Yes.
Will be
there you
titled
go.
The Power of the Doctor. If we want to be really keen about the spreadsheet, we could enter it now.
We could. We're
the
keen.
old-
We'll do that.
One
Real
thing we know
time.
about Doctor Who fans, we're keen about spreadsheets.
That's true. We like
So,
things
The
organized.
Power of the Doctor. What do you think of that title, especially for regeneration episodes?
It's a little weird. I mean, it's funny.
Mm.
Like the thing I'm associated with, obviously, is like Power of the Daleks. Actually,
Yes, I was going to say
and
that.
I think in that case, it was kind of amusingly and aptly literal.
Mm.
They're like the Daleks are literally walking around with cords, and they need to get electricity to power themselves. Which I thought, okay, because there's obviously a double meaning, but it's
Yeah.
in the context of the Doctor. I think this is probably, and I kind of hope it is, that they're going to try to close the book on the Chibnall era
Mhm.
by going back into the Doctor as the timeless child, and like sort of what does that mean, and sort of giving that a little more depth, and like what does that mean for her power?
Yeah, because
Um,
Chibnall has always talked about how this is a multi-season arc that he had in mind, right?
yeah,
We can disagree about the execution, but he clearly had the plan to begin with, that he'd get to the timeless child situation. So it would totally make sense that he would wrap that up. With the Doctor dropping the key, the watch fob into the TARDIS in the end of Flux.
Mm.
That kind of begs a sequel to that. But yeah, we got to wrap up the timeless child thing. Wrap it up, or I don't know, leave it for RTD to explore further. Maybe simplify the whole Doctor's timeline. Something might happen there.
Yeah, maybe. I mean, I guess you could do one of many things, I guess, but the main things you could do are like, one, retcon it.
Yeah.
Like let's just go back, like, react to maybe sort of the negative reactions that it had, and then, now we're back to normal. I kind of hope they don't do that. Like we had this discussion before with regard to what RTD could do with it. Like
Right.
I like the idea of the improv yes and philosophy being applied
Mhm.
to this. So
Yeah, timeless child is useful. We've discussed this, quite a lot in the past. I think more time goes on from the way it was revealed, the more we're like, oh yeah, actually, it explains the brain of Morbius doctors.
Right.
It explains, it could explain the whole season 6B thing with Troughton. It's a useful addition to headcanon. So yeah, I hope they don't retcon it completely.
Yeah, it
But
can be. I mean, a part of me almost, I have to confess, part of me does kind of hope that sort of happens, but a part of me also hopes it doesn't. Like, I think it's a bit of a cop out if they did.
Yeah.
So
yeah, maybe not remove it completely, but
Yeah.
leave us with something new, some new structure. I'm sort of, I don't know if you were a DC Comics fan in the 80s, Pete, but do you remember
challenge me.
Crisis on Infinite Earths? Was
Of course,
it called?
I remember Crisis on Infinite Earths. Yeah,
It's basically where
Huge.
there was too much DC canon, right? So they smushed it down into one Earth.
Yeah.
And that's sort of the vibe that I'm feeling here from the Centenary special.
Yeah.
From what RTD wants to do as well. It's like that would make a lot of sense to kind of Crisis on Infinite Earths the Doctor a little bit.
Yeah. I'd like that. Yeah, fill in some blanks, and then, but also by filling in the blanks, like stabilize us.
Yeah, stabilize it, reduce it, bring it down to something that a fan can keep in their head all at once.
Yeah,
It's part of the
right.
problem with Who is like there's just too much stuff out there to keep in your mind at the same time. We struggle with discussing it for that very reason.
Yeah, exactly. I guess one of the reasons fans have been a little bit at sea since the Timeless Child was debuted was the rules were so clear before. Even if you could debate the details of them, it was like, okay, 12 regenerations, Gallifrey, blah blah blah, and those rules have been thrown out. But like, what has replaced them has been a bit ambiguous. So
Yeah.
let's get more clarity there. And if
Yeah,
that can
and
do
the
this
Doctor's
and
lack
a
of
good Doctor Who episode,
interest.
then awesome.
The Doctor's lack of interest in the sort of the essential question the Timeless Child begs, which is, where did she come from in the first place? Where did that portal come from?
Of course, yeah.
And so she's surprisingly curious about that, right? It's kind of, we've had that, but that's the Chekhov's gun of this situation, Mr. Chibnall. Let's see what you can do about making it go off in the last act.
That's right. Don't be too shy about that trigger. Just go for it. You've definitely been going for it. Keep it going. All right. And I think the hardcore Pull to Open fans were expecting us to get a comprehensive list of Prince Charles's appearances on Doctor Who.
Yes, the artist formerly known as Prince Charles.
Because we talked about that last week. But I think it's literally, like, I'll be honest with you, we didn't go through a fine-tooth comb this week just because, we just couldn't find the time. But I'm
this is
pretty
exactly
sure
what we're talking about. It's too big. The canon is too big for us to...
it is, exactly. But I think there are really only 2 places where he's actually seen, and they're the same ones as Prince Philip, right? Which is to say the Idiot's Lantern on the balcony as a child, and then in Lie of the Land in photograph, as a photograph.
Yeah, and then there's sort of mentions off screen, like, Battlefield talks about the king. And then also, as you mentioned last week, the fact that in Inferno, we hear that the whole royal family has been killed. So that would have technically included Charles, I believe. And
there's kind of an oblique reference in another Tennant episode, The Girl in the Fireplace, where Rose mentions Camilla. That's right. She says Camilla, which is definitely a testament to how far Camilla has come in terms of her public image. She was named Queen Consort. That was a change. She was just going to be the consort. Now she has the full title. It was a very recent change that the Queen made before she passed. And Camilla is definitely not in the same place that she was in the Girl in the Fireplace era. And I think we discussed that at the time, didn't we? There was kind of, it was a great one-word explanation for the situation of the King's Mistress in Girl of the Fireplace, but also dates that particular episode of the show. Yeah, a little bit. But it's interesting. I mean, you could, I'm putting all these randomizer connections together. I remember we also saw that as a bit of a emblematic of the show being written primarily for a UK audience. And now with the episode we're going to talk about today, the Doctor Who is much more aware of it being itself being a global phenomenon. Totally. So. I was going to say that with Rosa, that sort of almost the earliest in Doctor Who history you could imagine it being done. It just wouldn't have worked at an earlier stage with the different production values of the classic series. Yeah, it would have just seemed really odd. I mean, you could have done it, but it was like, it would have honestly was a little random. But so now I feel like it is. Yeah. You're sort of reminding me with the Girl in the Fireplace thing that, like, we're in the weird situation where Doctor Who has named the new Queen Consort, but has not named the new King, because even though Charles's picture may have been in, Idiot's Lantern and possibly others, he has not been mentioned by name. It's true. But she has. Yeah. So that's interesting. Yeah. So they'll get to it. They will get to it. I'm sure RTD is scribbling furiously, typing furiously, pausing only to light a fresh cigarette. I think that I don't want to go too far down the Charles rabbit hole, but I think he... Didn't he make an behind the scenes sort of tour appearance when they were filming Day of the Doctor? I feel like I remember seeing some footage of the Royals hanging out around the TARDIS console for a little bit with Matt Smith and others, and I think Charles was one of them. I don't remember that. Well, it's a good segue into our request. Say fans, obviously we're just doing this from memory. If you guys know of other appearances of Prince Charles, King Charles, on the show or references, let us know. Let us know if we missed any. And maybe drop it into your review. Drop it into your review, and maybe just use a couple of ears for the emoji title at the top. That's all you need. Yeah, ears and gray hair. Yep. Alrighty. That's the business, man, and that means we can no longer delay the inevitable. Okay, this is the time. It's time for TLDW, everybody. Too long, didn't watch, too long Doctor Who, where one of us will summarize the plot of the Doctor Who episode that we're about to talk about in record time. So for the new series, the episodes tend to be about 45 to 50 minutes each. Since we allot 30 seconds for every classic series episode, which are about 25 minutes, we allot a full minute for episodes of the new series. And that means, Chris,
it's my
you
turn.
have 60 whole seconds to summarize the plot of Rosa.
You say whole seconds. I mean, this is the problem, right? We've come from the classic series. We've been in the classic series since Eases of Light, which was 10 million years ago. And we've been used to getting 30 seconds for each episode. So, most frequently we've been doing this in 2 minutes. We did the two doctors in 3 minutes. We've had acres of time, and we've not been used to the new show and the way that it sort of jam packs the plot in to 1 45-minute, 50-minute episode. So we're a little unaccustomed to this, and I'm a little nervous, especially because I feel like it's Rosa. We need to do it justice.
Don't screw it up, man.
Don't screw it up.
Those commenters will come for you. But I think you actually make a good point. Not to pontificate too much on our own podcast, but there is like a pacing difference between old Who and new Who, which our TLDW system doesn't really account for. But you know what? It's kind of the world, man.
Here we are. I got to do it. All right.
I don't make the rules. Well, except we do.
All right. Yeah.
But enough with the stalling, the delaying. It is time to start the official pull to open summary of Rosa, which begins in 3, 2, 1, go.
Okay, so the opening is Rosa Parks in the 40s actually getting on a bus and being told to get on the back with the same driver that she's famously linked with. But she does it on that occasion. She gets on the back of the bus. And then it cuts to 1955, and the Dr. Graham, Yaz, and Ryan have landed in Montgomery, Alabama, and they step out, and Ryan is slapped by a white man for picking up a handkerchief that his wife dropped. And all of a sudden we are right in the middle of the racist world of Rosa Parks, who is then introduced and stops Ryan from being hurt further. And they meet her, and the doctor discovers she's got Artron energy all over her. And it turns out to be this guy, this criminal from the future, who's kind of trying to manipulate the timeline and make sure that Rosa Parks doesn't do her famous sit-in on the bus on that day. And the doctor, Graham, and Yaz, and Ryan all run around trying to make sure that Rosa actually does go through with her protest and that history has not changed. And they succeed!
Time. Nice.
Wow. Yes.
I was a little worried, honestly, when you got to around 30 seconds and it seemed like you'd only gotten about 5 minutes into the episode.
I mean, it is sort of like it's kind of that simple, right? It's not.
Agreed.
It's not a complex plot. We can get into there's some wonderful bits along the way, and we can get into talking about the overall plot for the racist criminal from the future. But yeah, it is sort of kind of at its root a simple story of the Doctor wanting to make sure that a historical event happens. Which is has this happened before in Who history? Because there's we talked a lot about fixed points in time. This is not mentioned as a fixed point in time. In fact, those words do not appear in Rosa. I think to its success that we're not even drawn into that whole debate. But is there any other case in history where we were at the Romans where the Doctor has to make sure that, Doctor ends up making sure that Rome burns, that Nero burns Rome. But we don't know, we talked about that at the time, we don't know if the Doctor intended that, if the Doctor sort of made it happen accidentally. And I can't think of any other instances.
That's a good question. In terms of like a historical event that has gone awry and the Doctor has to fix it and make it happen properly, the way it was meant to.
I mean, the only thing I can think of is the Beethoven reference at the start of Under the Lake, I think it was. The Capaldi one, where he ends his little monologue by doing Beethoven's Fifth on the guitar.
Explaining the bootstrap paradox, right?
It's explaining the bootstrap paradox. Google it. Love that line.
You got it.
But he also, like the implication is that he discovers that Beethoven never existed, so he has to step into Beethoven's shoes. So that's sort of, that could just be a tall tale, which I think is echoed wonderfully here with the Banksy line.
Right. Yeah.
The Doctor's like, I'm not Banksy, or am I?
Yeah, there's a lot of good humor in this one, I found. It finds the humor in this sort of ugly sort of side of history somehow.
Yeah.
So they keep it light enough. So I'm not sure if this exact thing has happened, but to your point, I do think, the show has this is close to a historical episode, as close as sort of
As the
new
new
and
series
newer
gets.
who
Yeah.
gets, right? Because like the historical stopped officially in the Highlanders, and then they sort of did Black Orchid was kind of a historical, but then every time they've gone into history, there's been some supernatural or future element that's going on, and that's the case here. To the point where I'm not. I think I don't know. Plot wise, it's very simple, but the whole motivation of the bad guy, I think you lose a little bit of stakes because he's sort of this paint by numbers villain, which again I think it gets at the central dilemma of this episode. Do you do more of a proper Doctor Who story where it's probably more twisty and turny? There's Rosa Parks is one element of probably a bigger time travel plot, I could imagine. Or do you simply do what they did here, which is let's just make this sort of almost a pure historical with a little bit of window dressing. It's a bit of a dilemma. I think you probably couldn't do it the other way, because then I think it would seem like you're minimizing the historical events in this case, which is kind of the point of it. But again, I think ultimately that for those tuning into Doctor Who for that kind of thing, you're not going to walk away satisfied. You will have like, oh, okay, I learned some stuff about Rosa Parks I didn't know before, and certainly got the message loud and clear. But it's does it really stay with you? I don't know if it does.
For me, it did. I got to say, so this is the first time I had watched this since 2018. I remember watching it and liking it in 2018, and I also remember thinking that it had a bit of a after school special feel to it at some points, and we'll get into that. But I got to say that seeing this, I don't know if it's just sort of the fact that like we're watching professional TV made again after so much classic Who, but I cried at this. I cannot remember the last time I just wept at a Doctor Who episode when I was watching this.
Which part?
And towards the end, I think everything. Like I started to really tear up when Yaz and Ryan are having their discussion by the dumpster, and they're like, it starts off, they're like, we came to see real history, and here we are hiding out behind a bin. What the hell? And they're talking about, and this is the very first time I think this has happened in Doctor Who. Two characters of color, talking to each other about their experiences of racism. That that scene packs an emotional wallop, and see Yaz just sort of so casually saying things like, oh yeah, on the way back from the mosque I get called a terrorist sometimes, and just sort of brush it off casually, and we've never seen this in Doctor Who before. It is it packs even more of an emotional wallop, I think, post 2020, right? This is the first time I'm watching this after the George Floyd protests, and that year in which we all became a lot more aware of the existence of structural racism. So yeah, I feel like Rosa is on its way to becoming a stone cold Doctor Who classic. I think that it has, for me at least on this watch, it had kind of Vincent and the Doctor vibes.
Really?
How you cannot. I mean, I don't know about you people. I cannot watch the end of Vincent and the Doctor with dry eyes. It's not even possible, even if I've watched it a million times. And I think something similar happens here. I mean, it's we'll get into how successful it is and how well judged all of the choices are. But I think it's undeniable that Rosa, like, it makes choices about how to present this history, and it had to thread a needle on a lot of questions, a lot of issues, the way it was going to present it. How much agency do you give to Rosa versus the fam, right? Do you
Right.
you could accidentally tip too far over into making it more about them, and then you're sort of taking her agency away. I think it was just so well judged, and just kind of a reminder of that period in history, which is not for British people. It's not that familiar, and we see it in the episode, right, where even Ryan is not aware. Even though he was in Rosa Parks' class, he thinks that Rosa Parks was the first African American woman to drive a bus, right? And it's actually Graham who's like, your nan would have a
Right.
fit. I think the first time that I really choked up is when it's in the hotel room. Graham is talking about how Grace, who kind of is mentioned more in this episode almost than any other, in the first season, that his late wife Grace, he kind of mentions how she wore a Rosa Parks t-shirt, how much this meant to her, and he just sort of does a little, Bradley Walsh just kind of does this sort of little look on his face, and he looks down and he's sort of thinking about things. And that's one of the wonderful things about this episode, right? Is that Graham is kind of, as a white man who maybe doesn't see all of these things in his everyday life, he's going through some stuff. He's thinking through some things, and there's that moment where he realizes that she wore a Rosa t-shirt, and here he is, like at the center of that historical event, and it's just like the weight of the importance of that seems to hit him.
Yeah,
and he's kind of he deflates a little bit. And something about that scene and the way that Bradley Walsh does it just really triggered the dust in the room. It became very dusty.
Yeah, I definitely see a lot of what you're saying. Like, I definitely think Bradley Walsh was great there, and he's great in most of what he's done in Doctor Who. And so, that honestly didn't resonate as much with me. I did feel like the problem is, I feel like they're sort of shoehorning characters and dialogue into sort of something that to the sort of overall message and showcasing of this historical event that I don't know, it was too unsubtle for me. It was too like, I get it, and I think there was just too much talking, honestly, like too much, like I think even at the end the Doctor says some thing about whatever's happens on the bus resonates throughout, which is all true. It's just like, do we need this constantly actually stated out loud throughout, right? I just almost feel like there were times where I just wish they would kind of let the stuff happening just sort of happen, and not necessarily constantly like try to hit it with an exclamation point, or some character saying something like around it. I just I felt like it was more after school special than historical kind of epic, right? And I not everything can be Mississippi Burning,
Right.
and with like really dramatic, like, what I mean? Like, it's still Doctor Who, so I get it, but I do feel like there was the you didn't. I think it's consciously unsubtle. I don't think it's places it has to be, obviously, like with all the Brian getting hit at the beginning is very visceral. Yes, you feel that, like, honestly, like in terms of like the feelings, like that's like that visceral feeling right then, like, holy crap, like this is ugly, like, and it's good to get that, right? Like, because it was
real.
ugly. All the whites only stuff, 100% accurate, like it's all just like, okay, like it's really Doctor Who doing stuff it doesn't really do a lot of the time, which is this real ugliness of the past. Like, it talks about it sometimes, and sort of sometimes gets a little jokey about it in the old series, but it does the sort of the right thing here. I just feel like once it's done that, I don't know, I maybe I'm just sort of having that visceral reaction, like maybe I didn't come here to be like, get my, I don't know, my face put into it constantly. And this is why I think, as a look at history unvarnished, and also sort of an educational exercise of learning more about Rosa Parks, which you certainly do through this episode if you just know sort of the broad strokes of her story, it works, right? Is that what I watch Doctor Who for? Not usually.
Well, here's
This
the
might be
thing.
the exception, but I don't think it quite worked well enough to make it the exception.
I think so. So Rosa is the first Doctor Who. There are a lot of firsts, and we definitely shouldn't go too far without mentioning it's the first. Malorie Blackman, British children's author, is the writer of this. She's the first person of color to write an episode of Doctor Who. The director, I believe, was the first person of color to direct, or the first black person to direct because of course we had Waris Hussein in the very first. In a direction on An Unearthly Child. So, Doctor Who has had a certain measure of diversity built in right from the start. But this is the first, black directed episode of Doctor Who. Definitely overdue. And one thing that they do here very successfully that Doctor Who had not done in its history up until this point is sort of center the experience or the likely experience of a time traveler of color. Right. And this is sort of a common trope that is becoming more common. Gladly, I think, I think it's a good thing it's becoming more common. This notion that, time travel is all very well for white people, right? You can pretty much go to any era, certainly in European history, and you'll be fine. But if the color of your skin is different and depending on where you're going, then it's a problem. And there are two stories that I want to mention that have done this in the past. Right. One is the Shakespeare Code, where Martha Jones is brought to Elizabethan London by the Doctor. And she's like, hang on, this is an era where slavery still exists. How am I going to get along here? And the Doctor's response is not something I think you would. I don't think it's aged well. I think you put it on air today. He just says, just swan about like you own the place. Says the white man telling the black woman how to, just exist in the world. Right? I mean, I think we've become a lot more sensitive to that sort of thing. And then there's the Capaldi Bill episode. Is it Thin Ice? Is that what it's called? Where they go back to the
right? Yeah, I think it is. I think that's the I remember. It's the Thames monster.
Yeah. Which again, Capaldi can't really do much about Bill's questions. Doesn't really do much. That racism is addressed. Capaldi punches out a racist dude, which is sort of like we got a little bit of a white savior narrative going on there, right? So these are two ways that maybe weren't the best way to treat this question of, what about a person of color traveling in time?
Well, maybe, but at least they did it. At least they did it.
Yeah.
As opposed to completely avoiding the question. And I think you're overlooking one more with Martha, which was the what was the one where he becomes John Smith? The Human Nature.
Where
she's a servant and the kids are openly racist to her. In fact, they make a racist comment, which again I think was, I think it was good to include. I mean, again, let's have some unvarnished history, please.
I do. So before we go too far, I do want to be aware of the fact that we are two white dudes discussing, very important.
You probably should have said that at the beginning. People couldn't figure it out.
Just a couple of white dudes. But I do want to enter for that reason a review in Hyperbole by a writer named Ty Gooden, who is a woman of color, and she now works at Nerdist. I believe she's the features editor there. But she wrote this lovely review. She really liked Rosa, and there is this issue, like she gets into quite a lot, was what she says. I'm just going to quote her directly here. One of the biggest wins in Rosa was how the Doctor fully recognized and respected the level of danger that Ryan and later Yaz were in during this time period.
Right.
It's such a critical and necessary reaction to Doctor Who has had a history of not properly addressing the issues that companions of color would face during their TARDIS travels. And she mentions Shakespeare Code and Thin Ice, and it had some white savior vibes. As the episode progressed, 13 became more keenly aware of both her and Graham's white privilege and how they can use it to act as a buffer for the people of color companions to help them remain safe. And you got to say, the scene in the hotel room it's so well judged and so perfectly written.
You're talking about when the cop comes in?
Yeah, well, the cop comes in and Yaz and Ryan are in the bathroom. And the cop is like, where's that Negro boy and that Mexican girl?
Right.
And the Doctor says, I don't recognize anyone by that description.
Right. Well, actually calls
which
them
is just
mongrels at one point. Honestly, this is
oh
an episode
yeah.
that's difficult to quote in places.
It
You
is,
know,
and
like,
obviously they could have got a lot more ugly in the language.
yes.
The N word is not used, which is probably for the best. But you don't want to sugarcoat it. You don't want to
Yeah.
sanitize it. And I think that's why that hotel room
Yeah.
scene so well judged, so right. I don't recognize anyone by that description. Doctor's trying not to aggravate the situation by pointing out his racism, but everything she says is so like
Yeah. Smart.
on point and has double meanings for
Yeah. It says
us,
like
the audience.
that nobody's here who doesn't have a right to be here is the other line, which
I
I
would
think.
not harbor anyone who doesn't have a right to be here.
Mhm.
And the other thing that really stuck out to me this time was that yes, it's sort of has those after schoolish special vibes, but also like there are things. Well, there are things that I learned. Like I didn't remember that the colored and white line on the bus could be moved, right? And it was a physical thing that could be moved
Only by the bus driver, of course.
Yeah, by the bus driver choosing how much space.
It's
Also,
kind
by
of
the way,
funny, but I mean, like, this isn't the point of the episode, of course, but like, in addition to obviously the Jim Crow South stuff you're seeing, like, people used to behave differently and
yeah,
I think honestly, a person in uniform, you would just defer to the bus driver as like the authority, even though like the guy's probably making minimum wage, well, probably a little better back then, but it's like, who's this guy? Like, why
yeah.
is he in charge? Like, even
I
putting
know,
aside,
and
like,
he's carrying a gun. The bus
Yeah.
driver carries a gun, and there's the great scene at the start where we see the Rosa Parks incident in the 40s, where it's just you see her a shot taken over his holster. Really, really powerful moment, sort of emphasizing
chilling for sure.
the power. But I was going to say, like, it doesn't proceed necessarily on the rails that you think it's going to proceed. It's not, it's not like safe after school special kind of territory. And one of the reasons is that wonderful moment where Yaz is sort of caught in the middle of like, where do I sit? Am I
Right.
in the deep South in the 50s? What am I? Do I count as white? They keep calling me Mexican. Where do I sit? And she's got this confusion, and none of the fam can help.
Yeah.
It's just this kind of confusion.
I like that one because that's actually probably even slightly more of a subtle point made, which is like, none of this makes sense. You know what I mean? Like, racism does just like, they're two, you limited it to two races is just inadequate in the first place.
Yeah.
Not that race even matters because it's a social construct, not a biological thing. So it's just like, I like, that was actually a really good moment. I thought it was just like,
it was, and it's sort of we should mention this was filmed in South Africa, right, which is sort of brings up the fact that South Africa had its own delineation of quote unquote coloreds, right, and where you were on the color of your skin spectrum mattered in and that was a slightly different construct. So she's sort of referencing the history of that too, but also you get to this point at the end where the Doctor and Graham especially, you can see, is kind of torn up about this. They cannot help Rosa Parks. She has to go through this, right?
Yeah.
They have to sit there and be witnesses to this ultimate act of racism, of her getting arrested.
And I felt like I was a little weirded out by like Graham's being so, like, I guess I get it because I wasn't sure if he was. I honestly don't think they clarified his objection very well, which is to say, like, he doesn't want to be there. Is it because he just doesn't want to see that ugliness and the moment? Does he not want to interfere in it? Does he feel like he doesn't have the right to be there? Or I thought my read was that he doesn't want to be a white person responsible for just on principle of sort of honestly, like, literally being on the wrong side of history in this case, even though it's obviously against his personal principles. But he just doesn't want to know that, I think, in himself, that he was there, like, not giving up his seat. And because he was there, this actually happened. But of course, it's all to serve, history turning out as it should. I mean,
Graham is struggling the whole episode. I think it's a wonderful subplot for him with the sort of the memory of Grace and doing right by Grace. And, the fact that the first thing she said to him was when she found out he was a bus driver was, don't be like this dude. Don't be like
James Blake. Is it James Blake?
Yes,
James
James Blake
Blake
is the famous bus driver who who got her arrested and who encountered her in the 40s.
Mhm.
So like that's a struggle for him, doing right by Grace, kind of coming out of this. You sense he has this almost naive view of race,
Mhm.
and sort of emerging, blinking in the light from that, and like I'm sure like it would have been a lovely extra line of dialogue at that moment for him to say something like, what would Grace think of this? Like,
Mhm.
here I am in the pivotal moment of history, like she wore a t-shirt about it, and I can't help, I can't do anything, and like that
Yeah.
it's got to be really hard for him, dealing with his memories of her, and what she would, trying to make out what she would make of this situation,
Mhm.
right? Which
Yeah.
is
Honor
hard
that
for him to
memory.
do for a number of reasons. But yeah.
I gotta say, I really, really liked the woman who played Rosa Parks. I thought she was
Mm,
fantastic. Her name's Vinette Robinson.
yes.
Um,
Doctor Who veteran.
yeah, she had been in um, 42. That was
Mm,
it. Way back in series 3, as I forget that I forget everyone in that episode, but apparently the character is Abby, which I
mm.
assume is one of the space station people. But I
Yeah,
thought
she
here she
was.
was great. I mean, the scenes that I could probably liked the most were when you get to see her more fleshed out, more as a
Yeah.
human, particularly when Ryan follows her. And by the way, Ryan is the worst person at tailing anybody, which he acknowledges in the episode, which is okay. But it's like I remember as we were watching, I was watching this with my kids, as I always
Mm,
do, and Jack was observing, like, okay, this guy's like, he's just walking behind her. Like, he said, they're the only two people around. It's like, why are you even going to
yeah.
try to hide it? It's like, oh, of course he's not. He's actually just
No.
trying to approach her. But when he goes with her to her house, they have a good, they have some good scenes together. And when you sort of meet Martin Luther King, and you
Mm,
kind of, he has that wonderful moment of, okay,
yes.
Rosa Parks and Martin Luther King. Like, he's just
Yes.
like, oh
Yeah.
man, I can't believe
Yeah.
I'm here.
They're both talking to him at the same time. He's like,
Yeah.
"Excuse me, Martin Luther King. Yes, Rosa Parks. Wow." Like, I
Yeah.
can't believe I just said that. I love that for him. It is a great episode for Ryan. I mean, I sort of, I was definitely not on the Ryan bandwagon in terms of like, I thought he was one fan member too many. He just like kind of didn't seem to have any progress to his arc. Like even the very last
Mhm.
thing we see of him when he leaves the show is him falling off his bike once again, right, as the
Right.
camera pulls away, I believe at the end of the Timeless Child, right? And I just wanted that one win for him, and it's
Mhm.
just like, you didn't do anything with his arc. You didn't, like, he can't even ride a bike now. But
Yeah.
in this one, like, this may be Ryan's best episode of all.
Yeah.
It is fantastic. Vinette Robinson, who plays Rosa Parks, born in Bradford, UK. How did her deep South accent work for you? Did she? I'm
I mean, it was
always
fine.
kind
I
of
had no idea.
yeah,
I mean,
interesting,
I don't know. I'm not from the South. So like,
right?
I honestly thought she was great. And I've already said like the stuff I liked about her. I think when she's actually, also when she's mending the doctor's coat
Mm,
later, she talks a lot about her work and being able to walk. And like, I don't know, I felt there was a real character there, a real person, and not just someone we're just waiting to do the thing.
mm,
So she did a great job on humanizing her. I did think like some of the other folks, and maybe it's just sort of the unsubtleness of the whole exercise, but I
mm.
felt like their southern accents were almost comical.
Yeah,
Like particularly the guy at the beginning who strikes Ryan. He almost seems more like a racist caricature than, like, again, I mean, it's a 45-minute episode. Like, you don't have
mm,
time to like flesh out everything, so I get it. But I did there was a lot. The only one that sort of gets, I suppose, a little bit of depth, and it's only an inch or two, is Blake himself, right?
yeah.
Who's kind of the evil, like, if there's an evil villain, it's kind of him, as
It
opposed to
is.
Krasko, right? Krasko, I like, who cares? But
Yeah, we
um,
barely even mentioned Kreska. I don't think we've
yeah,
mentioned his name till this point. But yeah,
yeah,
we'll get to him. But let's deal with the bus driver, James Blake, because there is this
mhm,
big subplot of they have to make sure that he's the one. Like, again, you sort of have to make sure that this horrible racist history unfolds as it's
mhm,
supposed to, and you got to make sure that he's the bus driver. even though he's the asshole who drove off without her in the 40s. And that scene where Ryan and Graham go to basically
Fishing.
flush him away from the
Yeah.
creek by fishing alongside him is so good and so
great.
well judged. And they get him to leave his day off by basically activating his racism.
Yeah. And he gets at this instant they're there, he's seething,
Yes.
It's a good performance. We have to give credit to who is it? Trevor White, I guess, played James Blake. But yeah, he's very good. I think believable in more so than a lot of the other sort of throwaway racist characters in the episode, even from sort of the first scene, like just the frustration, I guess, that he's trying to convey as a bus driver. I mean, you kind of like he's, for whatever, in his racist mind, someone's sort of getting out of line, and you kind of like, even though you don't really understand the racist aspect to it, you believe the emotion that he's going through there. So,
and do you know what, Trevor White? He's Canadian.
Oh wow,
one of your people.
Yeah. Wow, who knew we Canadians could play terrible racists so such depth and
but afterwards he had to say sorry to everyone,
of course,
multiple times. Sorry I said that. Sorry.
I gotta say, I mean, in today's day and age, and even post 2020, I do have a lot of respect for people who do sort of make that choice, because it is like, as an actor today, with how the world is, I mean, so people like, I think it's stupid, honestly, frankly, for people to go like, hey, you played a character who's racist, therefore I'm going to think you're a racist or something. And I'm not saying every piece of work is, like, obviously there's certain pieces of work that you might not want to be associated with, but generally if you're an actor, you're taking a job. And I don't think Leonardo DiCaprio, for example, is a terrible racist just because he was in that one Quentin Tarantino thing where he said the N-word a bunch of times, right? Like,
right.
I think that's just silly. So credit to I've just said his name. I forgot it. Trevor
White. Yeah, I know. It's funny. I'm actually just looking at photos of him on Google. He seems very good at sort of disappearing into different roles and looking different for each of them. So maybe that's why he was like, yes, I can get away with playing this famous racist dude from history.
I think what's best about it is his eyes. Like when he's furious and believably furious, his eyes just get really big. And, I think that somehow, I don't know, he was very convincing. Yeah, it worked.
So we should talk about the actual history of this. Maybe time for Chris's History Corner.
Time for Chris's History Corner.
It may even call it the Drunk History Corner, because this is. Are you a fan of drunk history like I am, Pete?
I am a fan of getting drunk while listening to your History Corner, but I only have a glass of water here, so I'll just pretend.
So I love drunk history. Being a history fan, it is just such a wonderful show on Comedy Central. But it will also educate you on a lot of things. And one of the things that it did that I will not forget is that they told the story of Claudette Colvin, who was a 15-year-old African-American woman in Montgomery, Alabama, 15-year-old girl, in 1955. On March the 2nd, 1985, and we remember so clearly from Rosa that Rosa's act takes place in December 1955. In March 1955, Claudette Colvin refused a bus driver's order to get up, and said that it was her constitutional right. She said later on that she felt Harriet Tubman and Sojourner Truth like at her shoulders, because they'd just been reading. It was March. They just had Black History Month in February, right? So she'd just been reading up on them at school, and that's what made her sit down, right? But this was sort of this did actually lead to a lawsuit that led to the Supreme Court saying that the Montgomery bus segregation system was unconstitutional.
Okay.
It was actually Claudette Colvin's case, not Rosa Parks' case, which got tied up in the courts.
Oh, wow.
But also, as Drunk History focuses on, it was kind of deliberate that they chose Rosa Parks to be the face of this, rather than Claudette Colvin. First of all, she was 15. Secondly, she became pregnant during the court case wound through the system.
Yeah, just kind of bad optics, I guess.
Yeah, bad optics. 15-year-old pregnant girl, and it was she was sort of kind of put to one side in the history of civil rights movement for some time. But there was a book that came out in 2009 that kind of centered her place in this narrative, and also just points out that the NAACP was, Rosa Parks working for. Rosa Parks was actually the mentor of Claudette Colvin, so the two of them knew each other. Possible Rosa Parks was inspired by Colvin, but it definitely has that sense that that the history isn't quite so neat as it's presented here.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know how you tackle that, right? As Doctor Who, I don't know if you're trying to introduce to British audiences exactly what went down with Rosa Parks and exactly how bad it was. Do you also want to introduce this, the Claudette Colvin side note? But maybe it's a missed opportunity there for the Doctor to be like, history is not as simple as you think it is, right? But then does that diminish Rosa Parks' role? See, we're touching live wires all over the place here with talking about this.
I would have liked if they'd gone to that live wire a little bit. This might be me speaking more as sort of a Canadian American now. Like, it's funny. Like, I have kids, obviously, and the storybooks they get today, some of them are on, various figures in history. My daughter has learned about everyone from Amelia Earhart to various, like there's a few things on suffrage and whatever that I've read with her, and so it's good that she's sort of getting these sort of history, and they're impressively detailed, I will say, in terms of like the accurate history that they give. And unfortunately, I don't think we've had one on Rosa Parks, but I think in other words, I think American audiences might be exposed to that more just because it's sort of, I think, built into the sort of system here a little bit. And I kind of think this might be where I guess I'm curious, like growing up in the UK, like how, like, is this emblematic of like American culture being more resonant over there? And is it like, I guess one thing that occurred to me in watching this, just thinking about it, well, this is obviously a big deal in American history and then sort of in some ways global history, but like, it's not really a UK thing. Was there an equivalent thing over there that could have been highlighted, or I don't know?
Not really. I mean, it's segregation was certainly it was a US South African phenomenon.
Yeah.
Obviously, it became an issue in Britain in the late 60s when the level of immigration rose, and we had a infamous right-wing politician named Enoch Powell, who made his Rivers of Blood speech, which was what he was predicting for the future of Britain if immigration was allowed to continue. And he didn't say it, but he meant particularly black immigration.
Interesting.
Right, from the West Indies mostly. So that's kind of Britain's equivalent moment of like the civil rights struggle, is kind of the struggle against Enoch Powell and his perspective in the late 60s and early 70s. Obviously, everyone was aware of what was going on in the US. Obviously, it was, powerful stuff. I think that, Brown v. Board of Education kind of sent shockwaves around the world, the Martin Luther King speech, obviously everyone internationally, but Rosa Parks not so much. I don't think I learned about Rosa Parks until I was just reading up on American history myself. And maybe when I was 15 or so, I didn't know her story.
Interesting. Yeah. I feel like it's a little bit in the water here in the sense that like there's a lot of references to it in popular culture. But again, usually not much more than the broad strokes. And I there's a lot of things I did not know that I found out through this episode.
Yeah.
But I
was just thinking one of them being MLK, right? I kind of had assumed the first time watching it that they were kind of twisting history a little bit to get MLK in there. But no, he was the pastor in Montgomery from 1954 onwards. So absolutely he did, march with Rosa Parks, work with Rosa Parks, and work with the NAACP, and she was the secretary. So that's a totally believable scene. that they would just know each other and just hang out like that. And the king was not yet known for being the amazing orator he was, except in his backyard, right?
Yeah, all of this is to say this is kind of a great historical. Like it does, has a lot of great facts in there. There's like even stuff in the periphery with Elvis and Frank Sinatra, which is funny. The first time I watched this, I thought the dialogue was coming fast and furious. I figured the doctor was just lying about the Sinatra thing to get that other bus driver out of the way of Blake. But it's there's actually a line about the cell phone that she apparently gave Elvis, who Elvis then gave to Sinatra. And so that's how she got, like, it's real. Apparently that guy's actually going to go see Frank Sinatra in Vegas, which I guess I like that, it's like, oh, okay. The doctor can pull some strings in the time stream and make certain things happen. It's a little
I love that
Bill and Ted
moment
almost.
where both Yaz and Ryan come up with a plan at the same time. But I think, speaking of getting the timelines right and wrong, they were maybe so focused on the Rosa Parks MLK timeline. Elvis was not that famous in 55.
Too early. I kind of
right?
thought about that. Had he already recorded he'd already recorded though, I assume am I wrong? I don't know. Maybe he wasn't.
He's kind of, he doesn't really break out until 56. So
okay. So
the notion that he would have been hanging out with Sinatra in 55. Heartbreak Hotel was released January 27th, 1956.
Oh, a little early.
Yeah,
maybe Sinatra took him under his wing a little bit there. Okay, I think this kid's going places. Just barely.
I think maybe the doctor may not be telling the full story here.
Maybe
the doctor lies.
No, but I want that to be real. That's too bad.
maybe she's like, she's not telling the whole truth in terms of she got the two of them together in 55 and was like, Frank, you don't know this guy, but watch out for him. Watch out for his hips. He's going to be amazing. And
there's more to it than meets the eye. Yeah, I think it could work. So
that's our headcanon.
We if you don't mind exiting the history corner just for a little bit, we can go into the future history corner, as we only mentioned him once, I think. But we should talk about Krasko, who he is, where he's from, and what purpose he serves in this story.
And how did he get that name? I mean, Krasko really sounds like kind of a brand of vegetable oil.
Yeah. It's weird when Doctor Who it's actually not just Doctor Who. Any story that tries to do future-y names, it's always weird. I don't think it ever works because they're just, the whole point is that they're weird. When I think about future names and how they are so weird, I always think of like the Flash, and there was like the Professor Zoom or the Reverse Flash or whoever was named Ebard Thawne. I think that was actually the name, and it's just like, what? And I guess they were trying to make kind of like, is this what Edward becomes in the 30th century or wherever he's from?
I was thinking of an electronic version of Shakespeare, the Ebard.
So Krasko, I think, is an attempt at sort of doing that. It also has some hard K's, so it's like he's hard.
Krasko.
Yeah.
Yeah, so Krasko is definitely the biggest missed opportunity, I think, of Rosa. Just because he's so two-dimensional. You can use headcanon to flesh him out. I mean, you just take one look at him, like that kind of the smirk that he's got on his face, the way that he looks at Rosa Parks, he's sort of chewing the matchstick in his mouth. You're like, yeah, I've seen guys like that. I know guys like that. Like they think they know better. They think they are better because they have this really uninformed view of human, evolution or whatever, right? They just got one dumb idea fixed in their heads, and now they're racist, right? And it's just sort of inherent, and just the smirkiness of it, and the kind of, I'm not going to be won over by logic. I'm going to, I'm a hater.
Yeah. Well, and then thankfully I don't know if it's thankful because I don't know if the story's better for it, but in that, if you're going to do that, like, keep them to a minimum, and they do. Which again, I don't think makes this a particularly great story in plot wise, but it is like, it's again like everything else with the story. In some ways, it's completely unsubtle. It's like he's just that that moment where he's just chewing on the thing. You're like, okay, I get it. He's a bad dude. He's a big racist from the future. But if you think about it, like that gives you a bit of a depressing message about the future, right? Because he seems to be, and again, this is a lot inferring a lot, but he has a vortex manipulator. So that seems to imply he's from this roughly the same era as Jack Harkness, which would be
50th
like
century.
Yeah, like 51st century or something, which signals, okay, so there's still racism back then, in that era. And so really, we're still doing this. And again, like there's no, like his plan is just to kind of make history go wrong or start to go wrong at this point. But kind of why and how is that going to be? And he kind of like just says something vague about here's where when, I don't know if he uses the word you people, where it all started to go wrong.
It all started to go wrong. Yeah.
Yeah.
No, he does say you to Ryan. He's like, you people.
Gotcha. Something like that.
Started to get
I mean, that's the implication regardless of, whatever the dialogue is. So, fair enough. I mean, you're setting up, the plot, but it's like, I don't see how this is going to further anything, centuries and centuries from now. I mean, and we could get into sort of what if the evil plot had succeeded at some point, but it's just so like, here's some stuff to get this guy to get the plot going, and let's give absolutely no more than that. And again, I think it gets at the central dilemma of the episode. Well, you could go more, you could make it more elaborate, but then are you then getting away from the message you want to deliver?
Yeah, you don't want to decenter Rosa Parks by focusing too much on this guy, right? So I get it. I think probably a few more lines would have done it, but we can infer a lot. He was in Storm Castle prison, which is where River was also. Storm Cage. Which is so when River was in it, it's just like, oh yeah, Storm Cage. And now you hear it in this context, you're like Storm Cage. It sounds like it's such a Nazi name. It's such a neo-Nazi name. Like you can imagine it as the name of a neo-Nazi website.
Storm Cage, right?
Stormfront is what they actually use. But Storm Cage, you see the tattoo, and you're like, okay, this is shorthand. Like this is a prison Nazi guy, right? This is just prisons are full of white power, idiots. So this guy's one of them. So he's telegraphing that shorthand, but also, I mean, we're spoiler alert for what if the evil plot succeeded. I think we're both going to sort of bring up the issue of, well, kind of wouldn't stop civil rights history in its tracks, right?
Right.
It would have, that a protest would have happened, a boycott would have happened. It was just kind of inevitable. Yeah. By the way, one thing the show doesn't mention, which I think is a very important statistic, 75% of the bus riders in Montgomery were African-American. That's why the boycott was so successful, because you're talking about 3/4 of the system. And that's why just like the system could not stand. It could not withstand. The pressure was so massive. It was kind of almost a South Africa kind of situation. Maybe
sheer numbers.
Just sheer numbers. So, but I kind of like the idea that he thinks that by messing around with this one event in history, he can hold back the tide of civil rights, but that he's kind of wrong because Nazis are dumb.
I think to your point, they could have done a little more, give him a little more depth or a little more credit, I guess, in that with just a few lines, like, oh, this is where he's starting, but he's got a whole map. You know what I mean? Like after he's here, he's going to go do something to prevent a Martin Luther King speech. And then he's going to go somewhere else. And then he's got this whole master plan of zipping around history, preventing, this delaying history, like, I guess, enough so that his vision of a racist future actually happens.
Yeah.
So what if, and that wouldn't have taken much, honestly. That would have taken just a couple of minutes or whatever. And like as it is, I think there's just too much of a question mark. There's these initials on his suitcase that are never explained. It seems like that was something that got lost in a rewrite somewhere. And
what are the initials again? It's like
GFB, I think, on the case, which is like, well, that's not Crasco. There's no K's. So what is it? And there's this other stuff he has. So there's also the whole thing with this chip in his head, right? Which prevents him from actually harming anyone.
Neural
So
inhibitor. Yeah.
again, I realize Rosa isn't an action plot, but the whole thing where he's shooting at them and completely misses when he has the jump on them, like he doesn't even have to start shooting because they haven't seen him yet, and he could have got closer and literally shot them. So I think everyone like, well, that's stormtrooper aim there. Like, I mean, I know again, like I know, like you sometimes you have your villains have stormtrooper aim. It just sometimes you need it, but here it was just so blatant. Like it was just like, come on, like you got to have some explanation. But the chip seems to explain it, right? So like, oh, he can't actually harm them. But then again, then you got to think, well, wait a minute, if transporting them to the future with this temporal displacement weapon is still shooting them, right? Like, and so he can't do it. Why use that at all? Like, why not just have a gun that he can't actually point at people? Like it just because that's what it seems like. It's too contradictory, because it's like he seems to have this weapon because he can't hurt people, but then he's incompetent with the weapon, and it's just like you could have. Did you really have to do it that way? I mean, it really wouldn't take much rewriting to just have that be a more believable scene and have these contradictions make sense. Doesn't ruin the episode for this reason, but it is like, come on. I mean, at least try.
To me, sort of giving Krasko a master plan would be giving him too much credit. I think that's the problem. Like, turn him into the meddling monk, and he becomes too competent to be believable. I think as a just random racist dude, because their plans are terrible, and they're just not very good at this stuff, right? I mean. But it's
true, but I just don't find that as interesting, and I guess maybe I'm not supposed to, and I'm supposed to sit back and watch the history happen. But again, it gets back to the sort of, I think where I stand on the episode is like, but that's interesting to a point, but at some point I kind of want a little more, like it's.
I'm thinking he's a very Trump era villain.
Yeah.
Yes, I said the word because this is Trump era Doctor Who, right? I mean, we have to deal with that. This is, I believe, after Charlottesville, right? And this
might have been, yeah.
It was definitely a time when we were very worried that the Unite the Right rally, the tiki torches burning, the racists were coming out into the open. For the first time, and one of the results of that is we were able to see, that they're just incompetent doofuses. Also scary because like they get into cars and they run over protesters.
Right.
But in terms of their philosophy, ideology, ability to commit to actions, they're just kind of dumb. Yeah, they don't really know what they're doing. So I kind of like that he's a bit incompetent for that reason. But yeah, I too wanted something more about it. Just a little bit something from his perspective. Why is he a racist? Like, just give us something.
I get all you're saying. I feel like though, like it just inherently lowers the stakes, like, because to your point, to our whole point, and maybe we just go right into what if the evil plot had succeeded, like even if he does succeed here, which we don't want him to do, and we're all glad, he doesn't, would not history just play out, right? And I think the only way I think it's interesting is if he is a little more competent and history does go on a left turn. And what I find, I think there's an interesting thing that would happen, which is that if Earth history is thus more racist during the period when the Doctor primarily interacts with Earth, the Doctor doesn't want to interact, like no longer his favorite planet, right? Like he gets disgusted with it, and then it's like Earth is doomed. If the Doctor doesn't help, like it's pick your invasion, like they just take over, and then
maybe it's just limited to sort of being an American thing, right? And that kind of might explain why the Doctor doesn't tend to visit America too much.
Maybe.
Yeah.
He does go back in the 60s at some point, though, with
that's
Matt
true.
Smith and all that. But
I don't know. It's interesting. You almost want to see a version of this where he realizes that the smart thing to do would not be to prevent her from doing her protest by just kind of, wiping all around it, but like kind of maybe if he made the bus driver, James Blake, like just sat him down beforehand, be like, there's going to be this protest on your bus. Just let it ride out. Don't do anything. don't give her what she wants. Don't arrest her. Or, don't get her arrested.
Oh,
Like that would be
interesting.
an easier way than all of the shenanigans that he does of like, destroying the bus and trying to make sure that he has a day off and all this stuff. Like maybe just walk up to the guy and like, hey, I'm time traveler from the future. Here's what we need to do.
It's like the Biff Tannen sort of solution.
Exactly. Would kind of in a scary way be much more effective.
Did you not like the sort of chess game at the end where, the bus is broken and then people are getting turned away? I thought that was kind of cool.
It was really cool. I like that Graham, like we don't even see it on screen, but Graham hotwires a bus.
Right.
It's pretty cool. Obviously you wouldn't have the fishing scene without it. Yeah. No, I loved all that.
Where do you get that bus though? I guess we're supposed to, because we're like, the one bus is broken. Like if there were buses available, why didn't they just get another bus? But I guess we're to presume that they got that from another route. So some other route doesn't have a bus.
Maybe somewhere in the TARDIS, which we know has a swimming pool. There's also a bus garage.
That works. Works for me. Yeah.
And we just missed that classic scene of the bus driving out of the TARDIS the way Clara's motorbike did.
Yeah. Oh, by the way, speaking of the bus, one thing I found annoying, again, this is just a throwaway thing, but it's like whenever the fam is on the bus, they're constantly announcing their plans to everyone on the bus. And everyone's just kind of sitting there like, who are these people? Oh, they're going to go in there and they're going to do this thing. Someone's going to the back, etc. It's again, it doesn't ruin anything. It's just a little like, okay, like, I guess we're just extras here, huh?
Yeah. The optics on that are not great, are they? But yes, you think like, go. They deliberately get a hotel room, right, to go and plan this stuff out. Like maybe keep all of the exposition scenes to the hotel room. Yeah. What did you think of the Doctor's magic marker on the wall?
Oh, that's cool. That's like that's a psychic paper. That's like Whittaker's psychic paper, I guess. It's like,
I love it. I love it. I think it's great. Doctor really needs to do more of this, like introduce more kind of special gadgety stuff.
Yeah.
And just the fact that that's the opportunity for the Banksy joke, wonderful.
Yeah. I totally agree.
Can't draw on the walls. You're not Banksy, or am I?
Yeah. You can't shy away from the gadget stuff. Don't want to overdo it, but it is like, yes, every now and then you're going to get a garage door opener scene like you got in Inferno, which does not age well. But I'd rather they do it than not, and then have those scenes be memorable.
Speaking of the hotel room scene, did you like the Steve Jobs stuff where Graham?
I thought it was great. Steve Jobs. Well, I also how he describes a smartphone.
Yeah,
someone from the 50s, and the guy's just like, that sounds utterly ridiculous. Or
and he sort of, as Graham is describing it, I think it sort of comes to Graham's own head that like, wow, this is actually a pretty cool gadget that we're all carrying around,
especially at the end, and a calendar. He's just looking off apps.
And it can send messages.
And stores your crypto. Yeah. Oh, wait. We won't know what that
is. And then he gets into explaining crypto to this racist cop from the 50s.
That's totally priceless. Someone should do that. Someone has to write that scene for some.
But it is definitely, I don't know if you've had this sort of, as Who fans, I think we all have fantasies of traveling into history and like of that is the first thing you do, right? You sort of reach for it as kind of like, here's the thing I'm going to show you to prove that I'm from the future, to wow you, to make you worship me as a god. Whatever your goal for traveling into time is, you can achieve it with a smartphone. If you want to go back and be Merlin in the court of King Arthur and prove your magic worth, and just fire up a few apps, have King Arthur play Candy Crush or whatever. Like that, just it's one of those go-to things. Yeah. And I don't think it's ever been done in Doctor Who other than this, right?
Well, I guess when they showed the tribes the true use of fire in the first episode. I know what you mean.
But like using the smartphone in particular, I feel like science fiction has had a problem adjusting to a world of smartphones and tablets. Certainly Star Wars has had this problem. Like you're starting to see tablets crop up in the new films. But there are so many times in a movie like, say, The Force Awakens, where you're like, if you guys, when you split up and you're running around Starkiller Base, if you guys just stayed on a smartphone the whole time while you were doing this, like why hasn't your advanced technology
I
figured that out
suppose
yet?
the danger, and this probably is the thinking, is that as soon as you show anything that is contemporary, like, or something that someone can lock into, well, one, obviously you don't want to show something without a sponsor, if like this is specifically this phone or whatever, but it automatically dates it, like automatically, you know what I mean? So unless you want to date it, so this is sometimes used cleverly, was used very cleverly in Lost, for example. There was a um, very famous scene the first time they did the flash forwards. Spoiler alert, there were flash forwards. But
Good
you
times.
see the character, I forget his name, but he was played by Matthew Fox. Jack, of course, his name.
Yeah.
Because every main character was named Jack for a while, for like 10 years. And he closes a Motorola flip phone that was contemporary to that period, right? Which was to say, like, oh, Lost, this is supposed to, if it's a flashback, which is what they were doing,
Right.
he wouldn't have that phone. And I remember thinking, oh, maybe that was just a production problem. No, it was clear, like they were actually trying to use a current phone to show that this was actually the present and not the past from the island. So, if you're doing that kind of trick, great. But otherwise, you're like, oh, I'm watching this episode a year or two later, and it's clearly an iPhone 5 or whatever it is, and then you're
Yeah.
like, that could get to be kind of it can kind of take you out of the program. I think more than something that is like, and it's never going to be contemporary, right? The way production schedules are.
Yeah, that's a good point, and that's why this in particular works. I think because Graham could just be thinking about his own smartphone, whatever it is. He doesn't even need to pull it out.
Yeah,
he just needs to describe it.
yeah.
So yeah, that was a very, very neat way to address that.
Yeah. But I do think
Time
it's like,
travel issue.
it is something I think they could do a little more consciously at some point, to pull out like a smartphone and have like people in the past just get like, what the hell is that? I remember like there was at least one show bold enough to do that. It was actually a very short-lived time travel show called Journeyman. And the guy goes back to the 70s or the early 80s and he has his iPhone. And they're like, whoa, like people are like, is that like some kind of portable computer or something? Like, wow, that's amazing.
We should also mention, by the way, that Quantum Leap is about to restart.
Oh, that's true.
Speaking of other time travel, I wonder, like, because the one thing we know about the Quantum Leap reboot is it's set in 2022, right? That's where
that's the present day.
That is the present day. So, are they going to make reference of modern day technology? In all of his leaps into the past, it's going to be.
And will they lock in the present in 2022 so that it's always 2022, assuming the series is successful and goes 5 seasons? Does he keep coming back to 2022, or does the present also, keep advancing in the same way? I don't know. It'll be interesting.
Yeah, the things that you have to think about when you're running a time travel show. I do have to say that just in general, and maybe it's partly the fact that they deal with the race issue, but this felt more real to me as a time traveler experience than almost anything else in Doctor. Like, it just felt right and real in many of these areas, not just the Steve Jobs smartphone thing, not just Ryan getting slapped in the street in Montgomery, Alabama, but also like the moment where they sit down at a bar, and to your point about like explaining the whole plot on the bus, they kind of actually do this in the bar at the start, right? They just walk into a bar, they're just sitting around a table, and they're just like, it's normal, and we're modern audiences are like, oh yeah, well this is normal, and they start to cut in little shots of other people looking at them around the bar, and it may take your mind 2 or 3 of those cut scenes of those cuts to be like, oh yeah, oh this is wrong. This is a mixed race group sitting casually at a table in 1955 Alabama. Like, of course this is going to be an issue. Of course they're going to get kicked out. And just little moments like that kind of made it feel really just much more real. I felt like these were actual time travelers.
Yeah, I think it works really well. I think the choice, what other choice did you make? But I mean, the fact that they went back to something earlier, so they basically went far back enough, because I think once Doctor Who mixes in contemporary times, especially since the show started in 63 and has its own quote unquote history since that time, which again, sometimes they use and sometimes they ignore. It gets a little weirder, right? Because I remember when they actually reference Obama in this one, but it's not the first Obama reference. They actually mentioned him in The End of Time. And I feel like when they do that, when it's like contemporary history, it doesn't quite work because then you're kind of locked. It makes you think too hard about how much the show's universe aligns with the real universe. And so by going back to the 50s here, it's like, oh, of course, like this is still sort of the shared world history that we can do. But yeah, I think it's also just a testament to the performances here. I mean, like, I think everyone just felt really human. It just felt like it was, people were painting this picture of this place, and they weren't being half-assed about it. I mean, it was all like, okay, they really wanted this setting to be kind of a round character. And yes.
What do you
definitely
think
felt that.
about the TARDIS's whole role in this? Because the TARDIS takes them there. It's kind of doing that TARDIS-y thing that the TARDIS does sometimes of like, no, this is where you're supposed to go.
Yeah.
You can almost hear Idris's voice in the back. I always took you to where you were supposed to go.
Where you needed to go.
But where you needed to go. And obviously it's like, hey, Artron Energy, 1955. Let's go pursue this, Doctor. I know you're going to be interested in this. But it's sort of like, it's almost taking it back to the old show, right? Where the Doctor just couldn't steer. And that's kind of the opening thing that we learned that they've tried 12 times to land in Sheffield.
That's right.
In the 21st century.
Bit of a throwaway line, but that was interesting. Yeah.
12 times. We've never had such precision on sort of the stuff going off off screen. Like you'd think that maybe the 10th time the Doctor would be like, okay, TARDIS, I get that you know, there's a reason for this, right?
Yeah, and I think this is, I think, a bit that works really well, just as a fan, because my theory, I think, is concurrent with what I think a lot of people's theory is that, to your point, that the TARDIS is doing what's good for the Doctor. And at this point, the Doctor is a little bit ambivalent about her fam, but the TARDIS knows they belong together and that this is the people you need to that right now, and you're going to stick with them. Like we're not getting rid of Graham and Yaz and Ryan. They're good people, and
I always took you to where you needed to go with the people you needed to go with.
Yeah, exactly.
Probably the other unspoken part of that sentence.
Totally. Yeah, that's actually good. I like it.
Yeah. Adds that thing that, the Doctor really needs a fam, needs to not be lonely.
So I don't think it's a question that has to be answered. I think we can answer it our own. But there are questions that do need to be answered. And those are, of course, the 4 questions to Doomsday. And there are 4 of them. And the first one is, speaking of taking places, why did the randomizer take us here?
Well, I think we both zeroed in on our recent visit to the 2 Doctors, but possibly for different reasons. I was thinking of it as the 2 Doctors was supposed to be the first big American episode,
right,
of Doctor Who, American Story, and wasn't, because that was too expensive. And I wonder if the randomizer's kind of on an American kick now, and whether we're going to get a lot of new season 6 stuff of the Doctor in Utah, sort of the other big American example. I guess we've done the diner where Clara worked, but Doctor Who and America kind of had this weird relationship, at least on screen, right? It's the accents a bit like we've had lots of Perry episodes really, so we've seen how bad the British attempt at the American accent can get.
Yeah, just the British take on Americans in general. But
so maybe this is the antidote to Perry, and maybe this is the randomizer reminding us that if Doctor Who had in fact gone to New Orleans in 1985, there's probably a lot of stuff that they wouldn't have dealt with, like the legacy of the Deep South. All of that history stuff would not, Robert Holmes, great guy, wouldn't necessarily know a lot of that history, wouldn't be immersed in it.
Yeah, it might have been historically remembered as a missed opportunity.
Yeah.
So maybe it's actually for the best.
Yeah.
I saw the connection with the two doctors as the two doctors was kind of a message show, and of course
Yeah.
they also spell it out right at the end of like, oh, it's a vegetarian diet for both of us, and
Right.
whereas that episode, I wouldn't call it subtle, but there is
Yeah.
kind of a that's it kind of like
Mm.
reaction to that kind of message, whereas here the message is obviously loud and clear and is much more relevant and much more like, okay, this is more resonant of the human experience just generally. So that's sort of the connection I made.
I've got a Revenge of the Cybermen connection.
Go.
It's a very tenuous one, but the asteroid at the end kind of feels like the extra moon that was sucked into Saturn's orbit that turns out to be Voga in Revenge of the Cybermen. And we end, and we didn't. So the final scene is interesting. Was interesting for me because on the one hand, it feels the most like an after-school special.
Yes.
Like they're all back together on the TARDIS, and the Doctor is catching them up on the rest of Rosa Parks' history. Here she is, getting the Medal of Freedom from President Clinton in 1999. It feels a bit too like it's the most expository kind of moment in the show. But then she opens the door, and you're in the asteroid belt, and there is Rosa Parks' asteroid, and I choked up again at that moment. I couldn't.
Oh, really?
Yeah,
okay.
I don't know why. It was just something about like the fact that she lives on, her name lives on in an asteroid. It's just awesome, and
it's a to me it was a sort of another dilemma choice because what strikes me about it is again, I'm not trying to minimize the asteroid or anything about Parks. Again, that's all good, and that's a great testament to the longevity of what she's meant to the world, but the whole thing in Doctor Who universe, like you feel like you could have amplified that times a million in future history, which granted it's fake, right? Like it's Doctor Who universe, but you could have said something along the lines of like, oh, this is a colony that's named after her or whatever, like some space station, which
get into Afrofuturism.
I get that why they didn't do it. You know what I mean? There's obviously like it's okay, well that's not real. Like whereas the asteroid really is a real thing, and but to your point, I do think it's like more of a continuation of that after school special feeling. Like I didn't like I got like, oh, that must be real. That's kind of all I got out of it. I didn't really get like because to me, again, maybe this is just a Doctor Who fan thing to think. It feels minimized given the scale that what you can do with sci-fi. It could have made it the other choice, and I wouldn't have hated it.
It put me in mind of like two other instances where Doctor Who has had to do this, right? And they're both instances where the Doctor has actually taken the person in question and shown them how.
Oh yeah, so Vincent and the Doctor again. Yeah,
Vincent and the Doctor. Obviously, that worked like crazy.
Yeah,
that is the scene that nobody can watch that scene with the dry
that's
eye.
awesome.
But also, I'm thinking of the Unicorn and the Wasp.
Oh yeah,
thinking of the Doctor trying to explain to Agatha Christie how famous she's going to be in the future.
She's had. Yeah.
And I don't think there's anything visual that happens, right? He just sort of like tells her about all the books, or maybe shows her some of her future books, or like. But it's a nice moment, but like you've got nothing visual to go with it. Whereas you do in Vincent the Doctor, and here you most certainly do. And it's something about the visual of the asteroid in that moment, like. It just the quiet grandeur of space, and here it is.
It's not terrible.
Interestingly, the TARDIS can actually go to where you want to. And,
again, this could be
ask
just
it to go to a particular asteroid.
It could have been just me, like, but my head instantly goes to like sci-fi. You have just so much available to you to scale things up and do something huge. I just felt like it was a bit of a missed opportunity, even though it is true. So again, it's just preference, I think.
Yeah.
All right, moving on to the second question, and I kind of already said mine. So this is you. It says, "What if the evil plot had succeeded?"
Yeah. So the evil plot is technically Kraskaz, but I think that we would be remiss to not suggest that, in this day and age, we have to be aware that the evil plot is structural racism itself. And that we are still in that struggle. This is like just, the civil rights era was an important leap forward, but also, the Supreme Court slapped down the Voting Rights Act, which really put a capstone on a lot of the civil rights era. Like, this is a constant battle that has to happen in every era. You just have to battle the racists. Even, we've seen, as we remember from Oxygen, where Nardole was sort of accidentally racist towards blue people. It kind of just is a thing.
Yeah.
It's probably always going to be a thing to a greater or lesser degree in the future. So it hopefully never will fully succeed. But it is an evil plot that we have to beat back. And I would love it. And I think this is what you would do if you were remaking Rosa in the post-George Floyd era, is you would sort of make more reference of the structural nature of this, right? Even though, like, desegregating the buses did not end racism, right?
No.
The Civil Rights Act did not end the Voting Rights Act did not end race. They were all just steps along the way, and the evil plot is wider and bigger, and we have to make sure that we can see it every day, because it's often invisible to many of our eyes, and B, you just always be alert that the battle is not yet won, and it's when you think it's won that it's at its most dangerous, right?
Well, I think you could. I think that embraces a political viewpoint that I think that why that that would perhaps increase what sort of some of the divisiveness of like the Chibnall era sort of and leaned into, and certainly leaned into hard with this episode. So, I mean, you could do it. And I think Yaz and Ryan's conversation alludes to maybe something along those lines, which, it's a good scene. They talk about how racism still exists in there. You need it, right? Because you one, have to acknowledge the progress, but you also need to sort of say there's still work to be done. And I think a lot of the tension in current culture wars is debates around what work needs to be done, right? And so to take a stand on that, it's a tough thing to do, and because then you're inherently going to start polarizing your audience further and further. So that may be, it's arguably the evil plot of television, to get really meta on is this, you have a show that is a mass appeal show, that has to acknowledge, the broad politics of whatever era it's in. And so when you do have these steps forward, at least as one half of that audience would say, when you you start doing the representation and you're casting a woman doctor, to lean further and further into that, would you then suddenly, like, if you're minimizing your own show's influence, then are you even really achieving the goal you want to achieve, right? And I think, again, I don't think that means you don't do it. I think it just, you have to put these equations in your head as you do it. And, for every step forward, you have to kind of like let the world kind of catch up in some ways, I guess.
It's interesting. If Kresko had really been thinking about it, he would have gone back to the Confederacy, maybe, right? Ensure the survival of the Confederacy. And that gets us into some very dodgy ground, because there's already too much alternate history in which the Confederacy survived.
Or won.
But also, we don't want to really get into representing it. That's the reason for that. You remember the HBO show that was cancelled? It was going to be the Game of Thrones guys. We're going to do a show called Confederate.
Yeah, I sort of vaguely remember that. But was that a casualty of the George Floyd stuff, or was it even before that?
Even before that, it was it just had a lot of people on Twitter going, why do you need to dramatize this? Why do you need to dramatize what a Confederacy would look like? It's just it's kind of boring. We've been there, we've done that. In so much alternate history fiction, let's do something different and not kind of go for almost Confederacy porn. In a way, because that has a history as well, right? The lost cause narrative kind of seeping into the romance of the American movies, and how many characters were, Clint Eastwood used to play a lot of characters who were like ex-Confederate soldiers, and it was
I can
just
see
sort
either
of
way.
okay.
I haven't been a fan of what is it, Man in the High Castle, that depicts
Yeah.
Nazis sort of taking over, and that's arguably similar in terms of sort of Nazi porn. And I think you do
Totally.
kind of have to be a little bit careful, particularly with sort of the imagery, which could, of course, you're obviously depicting a horror and the irony of it, but then that can get co-opted. Which I think is sort of the fear. So it's a difficult thing when you're trying to balance these things.
One day the randomizer will take us to Let's Kill Hitler.
Yeah,
and we can have we can sort of continue this discussion on like, well, how much do you show of the of this ratio? How much do you play Nazis for laughs? How much is that okay? How do you lock Hitler in a closet and just sort of get away with that for the entire episode? But yeah.
All right, we'll get there when we get there. But right now, we want to know when the Clara Splinter got here. So, and where she is. So, where is the Clara Splinter in Rosa?
Yeah. I realize we haven't explained the Clara Splinter in a while, so we should just tell new listeners that that remind you that in the name of the Doctor, Clara steps into the Doctor's timeline, is saving him throughout it. We've sort of used that as our jumping off point to fill plot holes by just saying that there is a version of Clara in every one of these random stories that we go through, and she's kind of helping to fill in those plot holes. In this one, it's hard to say. Maybe she's, maybe she's in the future and she's Krasko's, gun aim training. Like she makes sure that he shoots like a stormtrooper. She's giving really bad gun education.
That's pretty good. And I guess to further just clarify the name of the Doctor thing, I guess we're presuming that it's not just previous to that episode, because Whittaker is obviously the future of the Doctor's personal time. So that's as good as mine, which is I figure like Ryan doesn't seem all that successful in getting people on the bus, but a certain amount of people do get on the bus anyway. So I do feel like maybe she was just kind of helping him out in like, ensuring that there were at least a default level of people ensure it was kind of like standing room only on the bus. Ooh. The thing is in the reason I brought up sort of the time stream issue is that even though we are presuming Clara's gets splintered throughout the Doctor's timeline, Whittaker would at least recognize her. So
would she though, or is that Capaldi thing that blocks him from seeing Clara?
Well, but he got his memory restored in like Twice Upon a Time. So I'm presuming that. I presume.
Okay.
So
she can't show up in the Doctor's sight from Whittaker onwards.
Yeah, from Twice Upon a Time onwards. So again, if you believe that's exactly what happens there, but so she can't be on the bus, but I think she's just sort of helping out with the passengers. That's my theory. It's the best I got. But I like yours better.
That. I like that idea. And gosh, I was just going to say something. Oh, you know what? She's the one who passes the mobile phone from Elvis to Frank Sinatra.
Oh, yeah.
Since Elvis isn't actually famous at this point, she couriers it to Frank. Because we know Frank would like Clara.
Frank would like Clara. That'd be a tough one to get out of for her. So hopefully she brought her own vortex manipulator or whatever temporal displacement weapon.
Yeah. Jump in and out.
Okay. Last question. Is this a Dalek, an Ogron, or a Viscount Banger? Which is, of course, our rating system, with Dalek being good, Ogron being not so good, Viscount Banger being one of the best ever.
One of the classics. Which, of course, we get, again, something we haven't explained in many a pull to open. The Viscount Banger is Lala Ward's dad.
Well, let me go first. I want you to have the last word on this one, because I think you probably have a different opinion than I do. But I'm going to give this a Dalek, but I think it's a Revolution Dalek, which is to say a Dalek in the Revolution of the Daleks style, in that it's very good at what it is. But I don't think this is an example of good Doctor Who, frankly. It's kind of a message show. Again, it overdoes it in a lot of ways. It's really, really unsubtle, which I get, how would you do it otherwise? But I just don't think as a Doctor Who episode, it it really works. It works as something else, but not quite that. Anyway, probably said too much already, but you go ahead.
I'm going to do it. I'm going to give it a Viscount banger.
Oh wow, look at you.
I feel like we need the sound
You're just giving them away.
We need a sound effect when that happens, like some thumping EDM or something like that.
I'll see what I can do.
Banger. But I think it's kind of especially appropriate because I remember they talked about this particular season when they were all being driven to the set. Bradley Walsh, who plays Graham, would entertain them all with his rendition of the latest pop hits, and they would call them #Bradders Bangers. So I think it's entirely appropriate to bring it, to invoke the name of Viscount Banger here.
Do it.
I think it is. I think it's a classic. I think it is. I was surprised watching it again, the extent to which I enjoyed it. Thought it was a really tight story. Thought that, the message after school special thing was there, but I think from a British perspective more necessary. But also I don't think that it kind of subsumed the story at any point. And especially coming from Old Who to this. Like this, if this had been an Old Who episode, been written exactly like this and transmitted in the 80s or whatever, we would be falling all over it. It would be a stone cold classic. We would, we'd know that. Like the reach would extend far beyond what the classic shows it. So I think, especially coming here from a classic Who, many months of classic Who, I'm going to perhaps overestimate this, but no, it made me weep, and I think that any Doctor Who that does that deserves the highest honor. It might be, in my rankings, it might enter, I don't know, a top 20 position. It's definitely my favorite Whittaker episode on rewatching it.
Okay.
Although I still have to rewatch Eve of the Daleks, so maybe that'll take it. But I wanted to, if you judge it by the quality of the episode by how many other Doctor Who's you then want to watch, it kind of makes it. I really wanted to watch Demons of the Punjab after this.
Oh, interesting.
Because I was particularly affected not just by Ryan's story, but by Yaz's. In this, and Yaz felt really real to me, so I kind of wanted to. They make an interesting pair, right? Rosa and Demons of the Punjab, kind of Doctor Who facing a lot of the history that it hadn't faced.
That's true. Yeah.
I still think Demons of the Punjab is probably the better episode. May end up being my favorite Whittaker, certainly from this season. But right now, in terms of what we're rewatching right now, it is a Stone Cold Whittaker classic, and Viscount banger for me.
All right, we'll leave it there. Definitely, like as you said, definitely shows how far we've come, in more ways than one. Cool. Well, that closes the book on Rosa, and now we must get into our own TARDIS and figure out where we are going next. So the way we do that, of course, is we turn to the all-powerful randomizer. And the TARDIS randomizer, as longtime listeners of Pull to Open know, consists of 2 parts. The Pull to Open Codex, which is a complete list of all the TV episodes, all the way from An Unearthly Child to Legend of the Sea Devils, the current most recent episode. One day soon, we will add The Power of the Doctor, but it has not been broadcast, so not yet. And the other part of the randomizer, of course, is the Executor, which is random.org, which does a great job of producing true randomness from atmospheric noise. So
true randomness, because computers do algorithmic randomness, which is just a guess at randomness. It's not the same thing, but atmospheric noise, totally what the Doctor would use. And Pete, I've just realized that we are going to get some Ncuti Gatwa episodes and stories in this business. By the time we finish, we're going to have quite a few of them. And my goodness, talk about the explorations you can make of what a time traveler has to go through with Shooty Goblet. Like I feel like Rosa is sort of the kickoff for that.
Yeah, even if we did them every week, which we will not for the next couple of years.
It's going to take us a while. Yeah.
We're going to try, guys, but there's going to be some breaks. We'll definitely get some Shooty before we are quote unquote done. Of course, we'll never be done. Truly,
we'll never truly be done. Well, actually, we will. The thing about this is it's kind of a manageable thing. I mean, it's not, it's a huge task, but say we can do 50 a year. I might be optimistic. That's only 4 years.
my video editor is shuddering at hearing that many.
Sorry, my math is terrible. My math is terrible. It's actually 6 years. Sorry.
Oh wow.
I'm like, if it was 200 stories we were dealing with, it'd be 4 years.
Now I know what to get my kids for a graduation present. All right. Shall we fire this up? I will be the reader of the Codex. Chris, if you don't mind standing in your role as the executor operator.
I don't mind. Do we want to challenge?
I think we do. Yeah. What's your challenge?
I'm going to say give us another historical. I got a taste for them.
Yeah, that's not bad. Yeah. I'll take anything with a bus. Or anything with any form of public transit. So whether it's subway, train,
is it Planet of the Dead, the Tenant special with the double decker?
Yeah, we could do that. Or I'll even take a plane. Let's get some go ahead and give us Time Flight. Give us something where transportation features prominently.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Public transportation.
I got a little bus fixation now that we've done this episode.
That's funny. You're doing a transit-based request. I'm doing a historical-based request. But yeah. Okay, let's see what we get. You want to give me the countdown?
All right, let's fire up the Executor. The countdown begins at 4, 3, 2, 1.
Where anything could happen.
139.
139. We're in Old Who. Oh, time locked. Bounced off the Mark of the Ronnie.
Oh, really likes the Ronnie.
All right.
Really likes the master.
Charge up the randomizer one more time. This is going to happen more and more. We're going to have to figure this out at some point.
Yeah, I figured after we do 100, we just take those 100 out of the spreadsheet.
We're closing in.
We are. Yeah.
All right. Let's spin her up again. 3, 2, 1.
Allons-y.
286. It's new again.
We're in New Who, the late New Who. We're in Whitaker. We're at the Witchfinders.
Oh my goodness, it listened to me.
It did. And it almost listened to you earlier because we just missed Demons of the Punjab. We're 2 episodes out from it. Yeah.
Oh, so close. But the Witchfinders, yes.
Wow.
James the First.
And the randomizer loved its taste of Whitaker. It's like, give me more of this.
Yeah.
Well, that's good.
Yeah.
All right.
Give me some fam.
Yeah.
Witchfinder, I had some issues with that watching it, I remember, but also had some fun with it.
Yeah, it's fun. I remember liking it generally, but we'll see. We'll see how it goes on second viewing.
Into it.
All right, guys.
Excited to talk.
Yeah. Thanks so much, everyone, for listening. This, of course, is Pull to Open. It is a podcast, a Doctor Who podcast that we hope you subscribe to, either on your favorite podcast app or perhaps on YouTube. And if you do subscribe on YouTube, go ahead and hit that bell, and you'll get notifications whenever we have something new to share. Of course, you can also follow us on social. We're on TikTok a lot at Pull2Open, as well as Twitter and Instagram at Pull2Open63. On both of those, wherever you are, go ahead and drop us a line, leave us a review. We love the reviews, and we'd love to read them out on the air. So feel free to leave one of those. And we will see you next time for the Witchfinders.
Yeah, we'll see you in the dunking stool. Take care, everyone.
See you, folks.